This is a Smite talent tree review. With the newest talent tree being the Smite tree, there are a lot of new talents to cover and different investment strategies. So in today's video, I want to go over the major talents, what the Keystone talent does relative to other Keystones, and where you should invest for most situations on the Smite tree. Without further ado, let's get started. First, let's talk the actual talents. The first you'll see is the major keystones is Killing Blow, which is a 6% bonus to all types of smite damage dealt for 6 seconds after an active skill. This seems like a small bonus, but the uptime of 6 seconds means that the ideal conditions for your secondary commander is going to be using the 6% bonus. And then your own skill on the second cast will be used, and potentially, and you should be able to keep it perpetually as long as you're keeping your rage up. So in a rally capacity, this is going to be great because it's a 6% bonus. It's modest, but relatively solid, as 6% smite damage is pretty great. It is worth noting that smite damage does not include normal damage. It's a little weird the way they word it, but you'll see certain talents that are worded as normal damage, which includes basic attacks, counterattacks, and your smite damage. But this is just for the smite damage skill damage. On the other side, we have Ambitious, which is actually a pretty standard 9 rage on basic attack. It's similar to other talents on other trees. And as far as talent trees goes, it's solid, but not super broken and fairly standard. Next, we have the Enhanced Smite skill, which is just 3% more smite damage of all types. So this is, again, not game-breaking, but very solid, and smite damage in this case refers to skills, based on my understanding of what the reading has told me. Across from that, we have Eye for an Eye, which is a 3% counterattack damage bonus, which is sneaky solid as an option, and is great for the field, and good versus enemy swarm in a rally capacity, and even against the garrison, because you're going to get counterattacked by the garrison, and you might deal more counterattack damage to the counter rallies. But overall, this is really great. Further down the tree, we have Thick Skin, which is a standard 6% less skill damage. It very much reminds me of a more toned down version of Emblazoned Shield from the Cavalry tree. But it's less overall stat from that, which is a little concerning. And I'm wondering at this point if there's maybe some kind of concern that this tree is going to become too strong, so they're trying to keep it mild and then buff it up as we go. Across from that, we have Fight or Flight, which is one of my favorite talents on this tree. When this troop deals any type of smite damage, all troops hit by the damage lose 45 rage. So additional damage triggers should work on this as well. But the biggest thing is your primary commander, then secondary commander using skills, will then knock 90 rage off an enemy. If you have an AoE, you're knocking 45 rage off all those commanders. That could be huge, especially once you get those 5-target AoEs like Liu Che. While this won't break any other pairing overall, it will potentially throw off skill rotations in the long term, and it might help 1v1 and might see a pretty big impact overall on the actual field fights. Lastly, on the main path, we have Thunderous Smite, which is a 30% chance to boost any smite damage by 10%. It's pretty modest, honestly, and I think almost a little underpowered, but 10% damage is no joke for rallies. It is definitely a good option for field as well. I'm not a huge fan overall when you look at the percentage. I would like to see maybe 20% would make me feel better. But overall, it's okay. There are some side talents. We're going to go to Pack-a-Punch first. I'm not a huge fan of this one. You deal 6% more smite damage of all types, but also take 6% more normal damage. But again, this is a perfect example. Normal damage is basic attack, counterattack, and smite damage. Whereas smite damage is smite damage. So even though it's all types of smite damage, whether it's additional smite damage or regular smite damage, you're dealing more on the actual triggers on your passive skills or active skills, but you're taking more from the basic attacks. So I think it makes you overall a little weaker to swarm, which is kind of what the smite damage commander's strengths tend to be, so that's a little concerning. And then personally, my favorite talent on this tree is To the Bitter End. Every 10 seconds of battle, you get 2% smite damage up to 10% total. This is one that's not as great, is perfect for the rallies. It might not be as great for the field because you're jumping in and out of fights, but if you could stay in a sustained fight like in a field fight, getting up to 10% smite damage bonus for every smite damage trigger is huge, and it honestly probably is the best talent in the tree since it's completely controllable and you can actually predict when it's going to kick into effect. Overall, this tree is fairly modest overall though, based on the current wording of the talents, which is reasonable as I'm sure the intent is to avoid future issues with an overloaded talent tree. The skill damage tree comes to mind when I think about that. As far as rankings go, I think this tree is probably a little better than the support tree, but it is probably a little less than the skill tree. But time will tell once further testing is done and they tweak some of these wordings, because I have a feeling that some of these wordings are not super clear. Next, we're on to investment strategies. The Smite tree to get with the full Keystone talent is 42 points. You'll see the full tree is actually 48, as you can see here. That includes the 2 side piece items at 3 each. Since the talent trees and the blue trees tend to be the strongest, it makes sense to do full investment in most cases. Overall, it's going to depend on what you do with your red tree as well. In the case of infantry commanders, the overall investment might look something like you would see with Flavius Aetius here when we do the skill tree. So when we look at this tree, just to do a quick contextualization, you have 32 down here and 13 in your yellow tree. Since the yellow tree for the current Smite commanders is not very good, what I recommend is taking these 13 pieces out. You take 10 to get to your 42 like we just mentioned at the start of this section, and you have 3 more points. You can do a couple things with those points. You can go into 3 out of 3 on Undying Fury and boost some other random stats where you can. Or you could do what I recommend is basically take the 10 points and then an additional 3 to go to 45. So as you can see out of the 48, you'll remove the 3 ranks from here, and you'll have everything but those 3 ranks filled on your blue tree. And then you'll have the exact same tree I just showed you on Flavius Aetius up to hold the line. And what this will do is it'll give you a great amount of tankiness with hold the line, and then you gain what is possibly the best talent on this blue talent tree, which is a flat 10% smite damage dealt after 50 seconds of battle. So in the case that you have a rally that lasts 10 minutes because you're fighting back and forth, 90% of that time you're dealing 10% more smite damage. Whereas the 10% more smite damage on the Keystone, which is supposed to be the strongest, is a 30% chance. So just mathematically, you have 90% uptime guaranteed versus 30% on a probability. And I just think that that's overall better. If you are committed to keeping your red tree more filled out, what you could do instead is go 2 out of 5 on Thunderous Smite and put those 3 ranks into the bitter end. This is a decent option as well, and it is probably better overall because you get that, like I said, 90% uptime of the 10% bonus, and then a 30% chance to boost it. It'll go down to 4% in this case. But overall, that's really the biggest issue, is that the best talent on this tree is not on the main line. So until things get adjusted, really you want to make sure you have 3 out of 3 into the bitter end, no matter what. And that is my recommendation for you, because it is just too overpowered to not consider using. It's just, the value is just too great, because you do get perpetual value out of it, especially when you're using in a rally. In the field, you might be able to make an argument, but even then, the 2 out of 5 gives you a 4% boost, and 2 out of 5 investment in a Keystone is a standard of the support tree. When you talk about Cage of Thorns, certain builds, Aethelflaed comes to mind, uses that path. So it's not something that is completely off the table. It's not something that's completely outlandish. But overall, that's my recommendation. Either go 42 or 45. You don't need the 3 ranks into Pack-a-Punch. It's just I feel like you're taking too much damage for the increased damage, too much risk for too little reward. But with that, we will wrap up our discussion on the Smite talent tree. This is just a base level assessment of what is currently in the game for the Smite tree, and as more information is learned about chances to be used and how mechanically some of these talents work, the investment may adjust slightly. But since the tree is mostly mainline, it shouldn't alter as much as those talents will be necessary to reach the Keystone, which is still a solid talent even if it's a little underwhelming. But let me know what you think. Do you want me to cover another talent tree in depth like this? Do you have a talent tree you think is super underrated, or a talent on this tree that you think is super underrated? Let me know down in the comments. If you want to see me cover another video topic entirely, let me know down there as well, or join the Discord using the link in the description. And as always, good luck, fight well, and I will see you on the battlefield.